We're feeling like we're all old hats at this now, right? Good to see you all here. This is our fourth and final candidate for the week, Dr. Sandy Womack. It is so good to have him here. He's coming to us from the Columbus City Schools. And so we're excited to hear what he has to share with us this morning. And if there's anybody new in the room, I'm Steve Warden with the Ohio School Boards Association. I am working with the board, working through this process of selecting a new superintendent for this district. So as we have done all week, we're going to give Dr. Womack the opportunity to share his presentation, his vision for Akron Public Schools. And then we're going to go to the questions that all of you have submitted and give him a chance to answer those. As we've said all week long, we do hope you'll share your feedback on that online survey. I've been checking every day, and those are coming in, and that is a wonderful thing to hear. So with that said, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Board.
Test one, test two, test one, test two. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Good morning. Good, good morning. You probably participated in this for the last 3 or 4 days, so hopefully today I'll be able to keep your attention and also be able to share what my vision is for the Akron Public Schools, because collectively I just want to take everybody in here in order to make that happen. And with that being said, I'll get started. So, as I said before, my name is Dr. Sandy Womack Jr. I am the husband of Monica Womack, who is an employee of the Akron Public Schools. I have 3 daughters, Alexis, Imani, and Nia. Alexis is a U.S. Air Forceman. She is in her 3rd year in the United States Air Force. My daughter Imani is a 2nd-year student at Ohio State University. And my daughter is 14. Her name is Nia, and she is the boss of the house. And she is actually a student at North Canton Middle School, and reminds my wife and I on a day-to-day basis that although we both have doctorate degrees, we're not real doctors because we can't write prescriptions and we can't give out any medication. So I appreciate her. I'm also the author of a couple of books. I'm adjunct professor at Cleveland State University. I'm a public speaker, educational transformational specialist. Most importantly, I'm a believer. I'm a member of Arlington Church of God, under the tutelage of Mrs. Diane Swoop, who is no longer with us. May she rest in peace. She's helped me tremendously. And I have a unique set of skills, ladies and gentlemen. I have been able to successfully work with students and schools to transform educational outcomes and increase the level of performance in schools that, for the most part, have all too predictable outcomes because of zip codes and things of that nature. We've taken schools from academic emergency, which was an F, to a B, not only in my school, but in several other schools that I worked in regards to being the director of school improvement. But my vision for Akron is pretty simple. A lot of people have a great leaders theory, that there are these great leaders, but there's no way to successfully move any work without a team. And so my theme for Akron is this: we are Akron, and we is always greater than me. There's no one individual that can make all of the changes and transformations necessary in order to consider and make success for all students. That's why it's imperative that we work together collectively in order to make that work. And as a leader of an institution, it's imperative that everybody knows their piece in the puzzle. So my focus for Akron is we is greater than me. So that therefore we don't always look at the individual, but how we work together collectively in order to impact change, most importantly, in order to improve the educational outcomes for the students. I apologize about this mask, it's killing me, but I know we have to wear this coat. So I'll do the best I can. But my question to you today is very simply this: by a show of hands, how many folks here have somebody in their life tell them to get a good education? That's the majority of this room. I would ask you to take 30 seconds yourself and just think about this. How do you define, or what is a good education? Give you about 30 seconds. I'm also still a teacher of think time. What is a good education? What is a good education? And while you ponder that and think on it for about 30 seconds, I'll move to the next slide. Our mindset. Our mindset matters. And as you begin to think about what is a good education, also think about who are the people who told you to get a good education. But the mindset that we have and the beliefs that we have impact the way that we work with students. As a leader, it is my job to work with my leadership team in order to ensure that we model the way. Believing this, we all play a role in the success or failure of each student in each school. As I said before, this is a collective effort. We all play a role in the success or failure of each student in each school. Everybody has a vested interest in this. We all have a vested interest in the Akron community. Whatever your role, whatever your responsibility is, whatever level of leadership that you have, we all play a role in that, and we're all invested in Akron. This is why we're still here. I'm from the Akron area. I lived in North Akron, West Akron, a graduate of Bookville High School, but most importantly, this is where I learned leadership, under the tutelage of Dr. Sylvester Smalls, and as a mentor, a mentee of Dr. Conrad Ott when I was in the Principal's Leadership Program. But we're all vested here. And as such, we must demonstrate a level of commitment and effort through our actions. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's more important to be about it. What are our exposed values versus our enacted values, and what does that actually say? Because when all is said and done, a lot more is said, folks, than actually done. So we have to demonstrate a level of commitment and effort through our actions that show that we as greater than me and the success of our kids is imperative. How do we transform and turn around schools? The one thing I found as an educational leader working in 6 and 4 of the major urban school districts, I worked in Cleveland Public Schools, I worked in the Kansas City Schools, I worked in the Akron Public Schools, and now I'm in leadership in the Columbus City Schools. So I've worked in 4 of the major urban big 8s. And I've also done a lot of research in regards to how do you transform schools. And I call it the TRIO method. In order for the TRIO method to work, you have to make sure that the schools, the families, and the community are all focused on one thing, students. But everybody has a role to play. And so therefore, the family is just as important as the community, and the school is just as important as, the school is just as important as the family, and working and trying to turn around academic outcomes, increasing the level of expectations for students. And each and everybody plays a role in that. If you look at the graphic here, you'll begin to see pre-K through 12 schools, out-of-school programs, families, higher education, STEM-based resources, and business community are all critical because nobody can do this by themselves. And it takes that method. The examples that I give is, I picked this up from Rutgers University in New Jersey when I was at the National Alliance of Black School Educators Conference in about 2002. And Rutgers has started a turnaround school model where they had parent pantries in the school. They had full service community schools that were open from 7 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock in the evening. They had programs for parents in those schools where they were able to get financial literacy, where they were able to learn economic development, where they were able to learn how to buy homes. They were able to get GED programs, and all of that was also embedded in the school because the school is a major part of the community. In Akron, we have several schools that are foundations in those communities. And although some of those schools are no longer here, for example, Rankin, which was an anchor in our community with Mrs. Reed, the schools are a major foundation, and they're also a place of employment for a lot of people who live within the community. But critical to getting these students to across the finish line is all of these areas working together collectively with the family, school, and community. And everybody has a role to play. Akron and the city of Akron have invested heavily into the college and career academies. And each school has a specific theme. And based on those themes and those business partnerships, one of the questions that I asked myself as I looked at this is, how do we bring all of these programs to realization, recognizing this just really started in 2017? What are the deliverables? What are the measurables? And how do we put it together? Because Akron uniquely, folks, has a tale of what I call 2 cities. When I was looking at the data, and I was looking at where the schools were ranked in regards to performance index, when I looked at the graduation levels, when I looked at the resources in some of the buildings in regards to the facilities, and there are a lot of very new and nice facilities, I was brought back to Bookville High School. And I looked at Heidemann Stadium when I compared it to other stadiums. I looked at levels of performance at a school like Bookville or Akron Alternative in comparison to what I saw at the STEM and the National Inventors Hall of Fame program and the early college program. And what we see throughout the city of Akron is what we see throughout the nation. We have students that are doing, or schools that are doing extremely well. We have schools that are struggling right now. How do we leverage these business partnerships in order to ensure that each student is able to finish and get across the line in order to graduate? And that is something that I'm certain that the business and community stakeholders have thought about, but how do we get your input? And one of my ideas in regards to discussing this is to expound on a very simple premise. College and career academies are designed to put students in a situation to when they graduate, they may be able to go to a college, they may come out with a career tech certification, which makes them employable. They may be able to enlist in the military, or they may become entrepreneurs depending on what track you feel. But one of the things that I found out through this, and even in looking at this with other people, is that in this, the goal is to get students to graduate, but also be able to prepare for life. I've said before, my mom told me a long time ago, grown means own. Your own house, your own bills, your own responsibility. And she also explained to me that grown meant that you have to take care of that. So she would always say GROWN. You grown when you can take care of your own bills, your own responsibility, your own mortgage, your own, car note. And when I look at college and career academies, I'm like, we want to put students in a place where they could be independent, whatever their goals, aspirations, whatever pathway they choose. But one of the things that I think that is lacking in this is that we have not talked about financial literacy or economic empowerment and making sure the kids at the elementary school level. There are tons of people who make several $100,000, but have credit scores that are phenomenally low and are paying high levels of literacy. If we don't start at the foundational level of making sure that kids understand economic development, financial literacy, investments and dividends, and get that just like we teach reading, writing, speaking, and most importantly, critically thinking, then therefore, folks, we put people in a situation where they're learning this later. If we're going to make this happen, one of my goals is to embed financial literacy and economic development using the companies and the corporations that we have that have shares and stocks, that have dividends, that have assets, and have people who can talk to them about how to make this work, starting at the elementary level, in addition to trying to fine tune what these partnerships may look like in the future because they're fairly new. You have Key Bank, you have First Energy, you got Akron Children's Hospital, and they all play a specific role. And they may not be the people to talk about the dividends and the financial investment, but how do we leverage the people that we do have in order to ensure that at the foundational level? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the reality of the situation is this. Not certain if you went to a college or a university, but I guarantee everybody who did had an English 101 class, a math 101 class, a psychology or a science or a biology or a physical science class, American or world government class. Folks, those are the same classes you take in the first grade. Every first grade student is going to take an English class, is going to take a science class, is going to take a social studies class, is going to take a math class. So if we can get them at the foundational for the things that they're preparing for as they move forward, then ladies and gentlemen, we're setting them up to be successful in life. So earlier in this presentation, I asked you, what is a good education? And depending on your thoughts, your opinions, and your perspectives, the question I really believe is this: why do you get a good education? I'm not certain what your answers were. I'm certain that they may vary depending on who you're sitting here with. But ultimately, we try to get a good education and put us in a position to help ourselves. I went to Mount Union College, which was a liberal arts education. I never understood why I had to take film criticism, why I had to take Women of the Synoptic Gospels, why I had to take class in music theory, why I had to take classes in regards to arts. I was just like, why are we taking all these classes, man? I just want to get through here and graduate. But what it did is make me a more well-rounded individual. I didn't know why we had to learn Grace Sherrod and A Mice and Men and John Steinbeck and how that impacts what goes on, The Old Man in the Sea, Edgar Allan Poe. Why are we learning this stuff? But in reality, the situation made me more well-rounded and well-versed. But in the end, it was the relationships that I developed on that college campus that helped me, put me in positions to help me move forward, take care of my family, take care of my children, and be able to move and receive some of the things that I really wanted to achieve in life. But this is why I believe, and one of the main emphasis on why we get a good education. Folks, education matters. In the United States of America, education and income go hand in hand, not by accident, but by the design. We did not deny people access to education for over 300 years, regardless of African Americans, knowing that at some point along the way, that it would impact what goes on. And so we know that education and income in the United States of America matters. They go hand in hand, not by accident, but by design. We want to provide our students with a quality education that puts them in a position to be take care of themselves and to be able to take care of their families for generations. And we know the good part about education, ladies and gentlemen, is very simply this. I don't even have to put it in a suitcase. Wherever I go, it's in my head. When I travel to New York, when I travel to California, when I travel to Florida, the education that I have goes with me everywhere I go. I don't even have to pack it. And so one of our goals is to ensure not necessarily what is a good education, but why. Akron Public Schools and the Board of Education, as I began to talk to, talked about 2 E's and an A: equity, engagement, and achievement. I'm an equity, diversity, and inclusion trainer for the last 15 years. I've shared the stadium with Dr. Linda Darling Hammond in Portland, Oregon. I've worked with Tim Wise in Cleveland Heights University High School District. I've worked with Geneva Gay, who used to be here at the University of Akron at the Teaching with Purpose Conference, and I understand the importance of equity. But one of the things that we start about with equity, number one, and most importantly, is this. In order to talk about equity, we have to do this. Acknowledge that inequities exist. The first thing you have to do to solve a problem is recognize that that problem exists. So what are the inequities that we see in Akron Public Schools that we collectively as a group can have an impact on and make a difference with? Engagement. We need feedback and a feedback loop from our community stakeholders in order to find out if the education and the college and career academies that we have in place are actually making an impact and also meeting the needs of the students that we serve on a day-to-day basis. And the only way to do that, ladies and gentlemen, is to get feedback. So how do we communicate and get feedback from those people who are vested in this? Because remember, folks, we are active, and we is always greater than me. We need input from our families, our communities, our stakeholders, and also our students. And finally, it's imperative, if we say we want to be the top performing urban school system in the United States, and I love that goal, then we increase the current levels of performance that we have in several of our schools. All of this, folks, requires collaboration, teamwork, and a commitment and effort to stay focused on what the main thing is: how do we reach the kids that we serve? And in order to do that, as the leader of the Akron Public Schools, I believe there's a couple of things I need to do. Number one, I need to listen. When I ask for feedback, it's not just getting feedback to go in one ear and out the other, as it does with my daughters when I talk to them. One of the things that I have to do is be willing to listen and hear what has to be said, whether it be criticisms, critiques, or compliments. I have to be willing to listen. Have you trying to learn on a day-to-day basis? I've always tried to improve myself in education, which is why I went back to school to incur some more debt in order to get this doctorate degree, but it taught me organizational structure, organizational development. It helped me understand Mary Parker Fowler's theory in regards to business and organizations. And I have to be willing to lead in everything that comes along with that. I don't think you could do a presentation in 2020, 21 without recognizing the situation in the pandemic that they were dealing with. Education has forever been changed. It was almost like 9/11 when the World Trade Centers were bombed. What we've done in airports and what has happened in the United States from that point on has forever been changed. And COVID has been what I call the great rebuilding. It forced us to come up with new methods of instruction. While colleges and universities have been using online instruction for years, very rarely did public school systems be willing to move to that platform. And although we know that does not work well for everybody, for some students, they're excelling in the online platform, especially if they have social anxiety issues or parents feel more comfortable with them being at home, but for other kids, it's not. So we had to come up with new methods of instruction. I wish I had some money, and I knew back then to invest in Zoom because I'd be rich right now. But I didn't know. And that's when I'm talking about financial literacy and investment strategies. As we start to look at emerging markets, if our kids are aware of doing this, then therefore their money can start working for them. But we have to learn new methods of instruction. Health, safety, and well-being. We all got a mask on, folks, even though mine continues to fall down. The reality of the situation is social distancing, personal protective devices, and things of that nature become imperative. And so how do we sustain that and make sure as we move into 2021, 2022 for our students, that we are able to purchase the personal protective devices, the social distancing, and the space that's needed as we listen to the science associated with COVID. And we found the new tools for engaging the students and parents in regards to voice. In some schools that I work with in the Columbus City schools right now, they have more parents participating in parent-teacher conference than ever because they don't have to leave their house. All they have to do is click into the Zoom. Now, while they may not feel comfortable in the school, they may feel a little bit more comfortable on Zoom. And we've seen that, which was an unintended consequence that I never thought about because we're still struggling to engage students. But what we found is that some of our parents do better on Zoom or WebEx or Google Meets than they did in coming in the building in front of the staff members, which was interesting to me because I didn't know that that would happen, but was an unintended consequence. And those are all things as a leader and as this group collectively in this district that we have to be able to put together. Final two slides. I'm a believer in transformation in public education. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, one day I sat in a science class in college and looked at the periodic table and they said name a gas. I looked at a P up there and said premium. I'm in college. I also looked at there, they said name another gas, and there was a U on the periodic table, and I said unleaded. I was unprepared, not because Brooklyn High School didn't prepare me, but I didn't prepare myself to take advantage of it. And what I found is in many poor performing or low performing urban public school systems, it's a mindset and a belief that the students, because of their zip code or their area code, are not able to achieve. While we find things that are successful in other schools, when we're trying to transform the outcomes of students, we have to remember what Dr. Ron Edmonds said. We, once again, because we is greater than me, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do this. Whether we do it or not must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we have not done it so far. Ron Edmonds was the father of the effective school movements in the 1970s, and this is one of my favorite quotes. Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben was the gentleman who came to Mount Union College and transformed my educational outcomes by making me begin to see myself in a common narrative. Akron Public Schools is over 50% African American. And in many of those buildings, when I look at the data in regards to substantiate what's going on, some of those schools are struggling. One of the things that I found in turning around and impacting public school systems and increasing the academic outcomes is that the kids need to see themselves in the curriculum. They need to see themselves in the walls, they need to see themselves in the halls, and they also need to see themselves in positions of authority and power. Because right now, the public education system, and remember folks, I'm a former director of curriculum instruction, responsible for imparting this information. They don't see themselves at all. Albert Van Doren's social learning theory tells us a long time ago that the first thing you have to do to teach somebody is gain their attention. Attention is most readily gained by those who share common characteristics. If you're looking into a book and you don't see yourself and you don't know yourself, then in many cases you cannot connect. And as a result of that, you're not engaged in the curriculum. Folks, in 2015, the graduation rate for African Americans across the state of Ohio was 59.7%. Ohio was ranked 49th out of the 50 states in regards to the graduation of African American students. 1 out of 2 students in the Akron public schools is African American. How do we ensure that we find ways to engage those students in the curriculum? Finally, because it is 9:10, I would love to show you this video on what is your why. We'd have to go to the last minute, and then I'll be open for questions.
This is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times this is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times they say the phrase, how do I know? Next thing they say, the key really isn't to know what, the key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We're in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour, hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you a clip. Check it. So you're a musical director? Yes, sir. All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Wow. That where I could sing. You know what I'm saying? Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know what I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Stop it there. And so, folks, as we conclude this presentation, it's not as important about what you do, it's why you do it. I made a commitment 25 years ago to improve the educational outcomes of the students that I serve, wherever I serve, to the highest degree of my ability. Through exposure, through experiences. I had students in elementary school, on college campuses. By the time I left Lathrup Elementary School, my students have been on 30 different college campuses. From Howard University to The Ohio State University, to Malone, to Mount Union, to Walsh, to Akron University, to Kent State. We went to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. Every year they visited every college in Stark County at the elementary level because somebody told them to get a good education too. And for many of them, regardless of being in the 98% poverty building, they wanted to go to college. They didn't know how they could afford it. And I didn't want them to be on college campuses the first time. Excuse me. When they had a chance to go, so we exposed them. When I became a principal at Jennings Middle School, we took our kids to college campuses. We took them to businesses in order to shadow and find out how they could go ahead and own their own businesses. Wherever I've been, folks, I believe a very simple mantra. Exposure changes expectations, but it's the experiences that we provide our children that change lives. The Boy Scouts provided me experiences to go to Field My Scout Ranch. I'm living on Wildwood in Akron. Who goes to Field My Scout Ranch at Clyde Institute of Time? Who goes to New Mexico? I went to Mount Union College of all places after coming out of Akron Book. My students were participating in the New York Civic Leadership Institute, where they shadowed state legislators and aldermen in New York City for over 5 years. They were on the campus at Columbia University. And the majority of those students who participated in those trips with those exposure, those experiences are doing extremely well today. Extremely well, because they had a chance to get out of their neighborhoods and began to see something different. Education has not changed in almost 100 years. We're teaching the same things that we've been teaching the majority of our lives. The issue is we have a very difficult time making it relevant to the student population today. And if we cannot find a way to make it relevant, then it is not going to connect. My why has not changed. It is to improve the educational outcomes and the choice of chances and options for the students that we serve through a quality education to ensure that they can read well, they can write well, they can speak well, and most importantly, that they can critically think. And I recognize I can't do it by myself, which is why I say we is always greater than me. We have a vested interest in these students in Akron Public Schools, and our level of commitment and effort must demonstrate that we believe that these students can achieve and do well because it gives them options. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Womack. And I realized when I started that I omitted a step at the very beginning. So before we get to questions, just very quickly, we'll start down here and give you a chance to introduce yourself and let our candidate know who you're representing today or what organization.
Christina Hodgkinson, the Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority.
Nice to meet you.
Good morning, Karen Tobin, Child Guidance and Family Solutions.
Nice to meet you, Karen.
Hi, Ann Robson, Red Oak Behavioral Health.
Nice to meet you. Again.
Joe Kidder with the GPD Group, who is architects and engineers.
Okay.
Tony Grimes, back under your YMCA.
Good to see you, Tony.
Susan Burke Herman, Asian Services in Action.
Okay.
Burnett Williams, Akron Children's Hospital.
Good to see you, Ms. Williams.
Pam Hickson Stevenson, the Akron Summit County Public Library.
Nice to meet you.
Morning, Ken Scheib, the Akron Education Association.
Lady Ed, nice to meet you, man.
Good morning, Jackie Silas Butler, Project Grad Akron.
Good to see you, Ms. Butler.
Good morning. John Garfalo from the Akron Community Foundation.
Nice to meet you.
Jim Mullen, with Son of Time.
Okay. Nice to meet you, sir.
Tracy Butler, Akron Children's Museum.
Good to see you, Ms. Butler.
Teresa LeGrier, Akron Urban League.
It's very good to see you.
Morning, Matt Devers, Summit Education Initiative.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Great, thank you all. Now we'll get to the questions. These have been submitted, and so we'll get to as many of these as we possibly can. So the first one that I'm going to give you is pretty short and sweet, but what will you prioritize in your efforts to help students excel at APS?
One of the things I'll prioritize is the instructional core. We need to make sure that students are able to meet or exceed grade level expectations. So therefore, I prioritize the instructional core in working with our leadership. When you move into the superintendent's level in central office, you are no longer teaching the class. And so you have principals who are responsible for ensuring that education, teaching and learning in schools are safe and secure. So one of the things I would prioritize is ensure that they understand that teaching and learning is our main priority and ensuring that kids are safe and doing that in an effective way. But I would prioritize the instructional core because I said before, our goal are college and career academies and getting kids beyond high school, whether it's a trade school, whether it's college, whether it's the military. Then that instructional core starts at the elementary level in regards to a foundation. So how do we ensure that they have the foundational skills necessary to move from elementary to middle school or high school? Those are some of the things that I would work with, and I prioritize that by getting my team and my staff together collectively in order to make an impact.
Thank you. So this one comes to us from Asian Services in Action organization. I'm interested in hearing how the candidate or how you, Dr. Womack, plan to support students from the immigrant and refugee community and or work with organizations like Asia to support students from the immigrant and refugee community.
Work with the young lady down here to the right in order to find out what has been successful, what has been difficult, what are the challenges they express, what resources do we have. There's a young lady I know with Carla by the name of Carla Bailey, who worked with the AFS program in the Department of Interior, who goes all over the world and find out what resources that she has in order to support what we need. And most importantly, listen to the community with an interpreter to find out what are their goals and aspirations for their kids, what are their challenges, what are their obstacles, and recognize that I don't know everything. So therefore, I need to sit down with the people who do and find out what their needs. And those would be some of the things that I would do collectively, because I understand in North Hill, where I used to live on Wall Street, the demographics changed tremendously. When I was the principal, the assistant principal at Jennings Middle School, we probably had about a 21% Asian American population, Nepalese. And now, when I look at the demographics, it's tremendously different. As a matter of fact, I'll be going to Jennings today, and I'm very interested in listening and seeing what we can do and getting input from the people. As my professor told me, the people who touch the work know the work. You touch the work, and I need to have a chance to be able to talk and communicate with you in that community to find out what we can do to increase the outcomes. Because I know North High School has a graduation rate last year, it was like about 74%. And I know large Asian American populations there, Nepalese, English language learners, and things of that nature. Like right now, Finley, 52% of the students at Finley are English language learners. You know, that's 1 out of 2 students. I went to Finley Elementary School. It was nothing like that when I was there. You know, I could have a little Spaniel and poquito, but that's about all I can do. So with that being the case, I need to find out a way to work with the populations and serve them specifically. And therefore, I need to talk with the people who are vested and they're already there.
Thank you, thank you. What are your unique ideas for professionally addressing on a timely basis the social and emotional behavioral health needs of students as they emerge from the pandemic environment? What role might the community play in this?
Thank you, that's an exceptional question. The one thing that I thought about today is we all have a unique set of skills here. And my skills are not social emotional learning skills. But I know there are agencies like Minority Behavioral Health Services. I know there are agencies like Mrs. Robinson's agencies who are equipped in order to deal with that. And I know a lot of kids are dealing with trauma as a result of it. There's a thing called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the young lady here next to Mrs. Robinson talks about her role and things that she does. We need to work with those agencies collectively in order to find a way to make an impact on those students who are most in need. When you have a full service community school, which is the blessing about being a principal in a school that was actually a community learning center, is that we have Start Social Workers Network, we have Minority Behavioral Health here in Akron, believe it or not, in our schools in Stark County. We had Dale Jordan, Start Social Workers Network. What was the other agency? We had Kids Swimming Against Drugs. We had all of these agencies in our schools every day in order to do programming after school, because one thing I found out about teachers is this: they're teachers. And so for them to be asked to do things that they are not equipped or skilled to do when there are agencies out there, organizations who can, would be a detriment to us. It's like you asking me to go in here and change the alternator on the car. I have a unique skill set. I have a doctorate, but I don't know nothing about alternators. Now brakes I can work on, but an alternator I can forget. So with that being the case, how do I use the agencies that are here and leverage that potential so that my teachers can focus on educational instruction, and those agencies who have that unique skill set can help us address those situations? And one of the first things I would do is use the Panorama survey. There's a survey out right now about Panorama that we're using in Columbus City Schools that gives us input from not only the students, but also the families in regards to what are the things that they're addressing and dealing with right now. That's why I talk about the importance of feedback, so that therefore, you know, we're not treating cancer with cough syrup. If there's some things that we need to do and we can do it collectively, then let's work with the people who focus and specialize in those areas, and therefore have them help us, because we can't do everything. Well, we can't do everything.
Great, thank you. So what are your thoughts on getting children and adolescents the professional assistance they need over the summer months when they have exhibited behavioral issues during the traditional school year?
That's easy. I exhibited behavior issues throughout my school career. The reality of the situation is, how do you engage them? How do you find something that connects? How do you find something that there's interest? Wrestling was my interest. And so that was a hook for me. I was a 2-time NCAA All-American. I was a state finalist here. And as a result of it, I was able to take that anger out on the mat. And it gave me a venue or a vehicle in order to be successful. Some students are really good at art. I have to find out what connects with you in order to engage you. So once I engage you, then therefore I can teach you. But I cannot teach you and make up for these losses due to COVID unless I can engage you. So I have to find a way to find the interest of those students who have behavior issues, talk to the kids, talk to the parents, talk to the teachers who work with those students in order to find out what is it that interests you. How can I engage you? Is that a project? Is that science experiments? Is it rockets? Is it TikTok? Is it Snapchat? Is it videos? Is it music? Is it, and give them a way in order to do something that they can be successful at. Because many kids, because of their behaviors, are getting kicked out of school, put in school suspension, all of the above. When in fact, these are some of the most talented kids that we have in the school system, but we have not found a way to connect with them or engage them to find out what it is that they really want to do. I've never met a kid who didn't tell me that they wanted to have a nice house. I don't care where I'm at. I do speeches and presentations from New York to Portland to California. And I ask 3 questions. How many guys want a nice house? Everybody raises their hand. I don't care where I'm at. How many want a nice car? Everybody raises their hand. How many plan on going to jail? Nobody raises their hand. And in many cases in urban settings, how many know somebody there? Almost everybody does. And the question I ask them is, don't you think that those people found themselves incarcerated, wanted a nice house, wanted a nice car, wanted to take their families on vacation. Yeah, they did. What happened? 68% of the people that find themselves incarcerated do not have a high school diploma, folks. 68%. So how can we find a way to prevent as opposed to rectify and engage the students that in many cases were students who were like me, who didn't really get into school, but I found something that worked for me. And as a result of it, it helped me be able to move to the next level of my life. Because we all want what's called chapters. I'm in chapter 50. I don't know what chapter 60 is going to look like. I hope and pray that I get there. But I remember chapter 10 and chapter 18, and that was a struggle for me. I struggled through that. But I found something that engaged me, it made an impact. And what I found as a principal in turning around low-performing schools is very simply that. How can I find your hook? And once you can do that, with that student may have behavioral issues and problems, and work with the different agencies in the area to help with project-based instruction, STEM-based learning, all of those other things, then we'll be able to engage those students.
Thank you. How will you go about continuously monitoring the pulse of parents, staff, students, community leaders, and others in ensuring that APS is meeting needs and adapting to change?
I've been very fortunate to have worked with one of the top superintendents, I believe, in the state of Ohio, by the name of Dr. Talisa Dixon. And as a result of working up under her for 7 years, folks, you have to remember, I'm used to leading. Very rarely have I had to work from behind. But what I've learned in the humbling experiences is the fact that you have to be where the work is at. Dr. Dixon has made a commitment, and I would do the same, to be in schools on a day-to-day basis. Every Monday, she visits schools. And she does walkthroughs, she talks to students, she's developed what we call the Superintendent's Council. So there's representatives from the high school to give her feedback every month regarding what's going on. She had parent cafes. So every week, or once a month, she would go to wherever the parents gathered, and then she would sit down and talk with them, so therefore she could get real-time feedback from them. This was done monthly. And those are things that I would embed in my schedule on a day-to-day basis, because you have to schedule this. Your time can be taken up when you're so quick because this happened, that happened, but she actually scheduled that. And one of the goals I would like to do to get more familiar with some of these neighborhoods is to be able to do that. Get student ambassadors from every school, and we meet called the Superintendent's Quadrant, so I can get their input in regards to what's working, what's not working. Get in the communities in order to find out what's taking place and sit down, because as my professor said, and I said earlier today, folks, this is ingrained. In order to touch, people who touch the work, know the work. And that's the only way I'm gonna be able to get feedback and find out what's happening. And I can't bring them here. I gotta go where they're at. I gotta go where they're at.
Thank you. So in your understanding of the Akron community, what has surprised you, if anything?
Well, what has surprised me? What has surprised me is the development of North Kingdom. In regards to all of the new businesses at the top of the hill as you come into downtown. What has surprised me is the developments over there by the Akron Urban League. I remember when those were the projects where Ty Hickman got killed. He was a friend of mine, and it looked desolate. But now those are beautiful condominiums and homes and businesses, and the Urban League is attached to the Helen Arnold Center. What has surprised me is the level of effort that the mayor is making with the schools in order to ensure that we have full service community learning centers and the partnerships that they're trying to create. What has surprised me is that when I look at the performance and the information on the Ohio Department of Education report card, remember, you have to triangulate your data. But what I look at from ODE and what I look at some of the experiences that I still see a tale of two cities. I see a haves and a have-nots. I see programming differences. And as a result of that, I'm surprised to see that some of those things are still in existence. I graduated from Brooklyn in '87. I left Akron Public Schools in 2000, and to see that some of those things are still here is surprising to me.
As superintendent, how will you work with new and existing community partners to provide embedded wraparound services to students and families who need it? What level of autonomy are you willing to provide to community partners in this work, given their expertise in their field and subject matter?
So what I think is that we are institutions of education. As schools, we are responsible for teaching and learning. And that is an expectation I provide for all of my teachers. I provide for all of my principals. And in doing so, we recognize that our students have needs that are beyond just teaching and learning. And when we talk about autonomy, we have to make sure that everything lines up, folks. I don't want you to be so autonomous that you're out here running roughshod as opposed to working collectively in order to create a vision or tying it into the vision that the schools have, that the district have. Although we need your expertise because you know that, then we need to say, how can we line all of this up in order to meet the whole child concept? As you saw with that picture, we had the schools, the families, the business partners, all of us have to be focused full time on what we can do for those kids. So how do we do that collectively? Listening to find out what have been their successes, finding out what have been their challenges, and also saying, how do we line this all up? So how do I make it simple? Everybody has a piece to play in the puzzle, but it's very difficult to know your piece when you can't see the big picture. And if we cannot make the big picture very clear in regards to all of our service providers, as well as our teachers, our educators, and our principal, then it's hard for people to find their piece in that puzzle. So we have to work together collectively in order to find out how we do that. So everybody can see the big picture. They know the piece that they play. And as a result of it, we are able to move forward. And they're, so we can move forward and make a difference with the kids. And they're expert in those areas.
Thank you. How would you go about meeting and determining which partnerships to pursue and or strengthen and why?
Well, we would sit down collectively with the staff members who have been here for years. I've seen Karen Gijic, who's been here for quite a while. I see some other staff members I know that when I left, and we would have to sit down collectively with our partners and our stakeholders in order to sit down and find out what's working. But most importantly, we have to give them a clear understanding gain a clear understanding of what it is that they want to accomplish. So that therefore we can put these things together. And I need to talk to the people who are currently here in order to find out what's working, what's not working. I haven't worked in the Akron public schools in over 20 years. So as a result of it, I'm not as familiar with which partnerships are working. And to my understanding, many of these partnerships have started in 2017, where they may have been working together collectively, but these college and career academies in regards to what's happening. And then you had a COVID year. So how do you gauge or measure the effectiveness of these partnerships when we had a COVID year? So those are all the types of things that I would think that we would need to do, not we need to do, as well as the Board of Education, who makes all the determinations of what we're going to do.
All right, thank you. What is your philosophy as it relates to aligning major systems such as education, housing, and health that collectively support and serve shared families? Which systems do you believe could align or already aligned with the education system?
Well, I think school, social service, and corrections are already aligned up. When the student's struggling in regards to what's going on, we get in contact with the social service agencies. If they're not able to do it through the social service agencies, then we get in contact with the criminal justice system, regardless of where it goes. It's like this triangle. And funding goes along with that triangle, which is unfortunate, but it seems that way. And with partnerships with businesses and communities is a way in order to prevent us from going through that circle or triangle of schools, social services, and corrections. But now looking at schools, families, and communities working together collectively, trying to have a clear vision of what it is that we want. I'm not asking Goodyear to stop making tires at Bridgestone, Firestone. But as an educational system, we have to make sure that teaching and learning and kids are graduating prepared to move to the next chapter in their lives. So how can we all align that up based on doing something very simple? And we have a lot of people from the business community. How many folks are familiar with a force field analysis? So the force field analysis is two things you do. Number one, what is our desired outcome? Period, point blank. You sit down and you say, what is our desired outcome? What do we want to get out of this? Number two, what is our current status? What does the data say in regards to where we're at and compared to our desired outcome? So desired outcome, current status. Number three, what forces are working for us and what forces are working against us? And how can we work together collectively to get to this desired outcome? But there's no way we can get to the desired outcome if we don't get input from the stakeholders. It's a standard business practice that I learned at Ashton when I was in the School of Organizational Development, Educational Leadership. Full force field analysis. What's our desired outcome? What's our current status? What forces are working for us? What forces are working against us? Which ones can we change? And how do we all get to a common goal based on our desired outcomes, considering what is our current status? Which means you have to have the data to substantiate where we're at in comparison to where we're trying to go. And one of my favorite quotes very simply is this: if you don't know where you're going, you might not like where you end up. So we need to be able to do that collectively. And if I have to bring in facilitators who train to do these force field analysis, I have the keto knowledge of it, but I've always used it in my school, but I'm certain there are other agencies, maybe somebody sitting here in this area that can help us with that in order to get together collectively on what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. So what is your approach as it relates to working with and dealing with a newly elected board when you are a new superintendent?
Getting to know them. I don't want to quote my favorite author. Ask you what your interests are. Who you be with? Things that make you smile. What are your interests? What do you engage in? What do you do outside of this work? What made you want to become a board member? What was your platform? What was your goals? How can we tie that into collectively what we are trying to accomplish for these students? And so therefore, I need to get to know them just like they need to get to know me. And find out from the veteran board members to the new board members, you know, what is that agenda? But the first thing you have to do is establish relationships. Dr. James Comer once said that there's no significant learning without significant relationships. And so how do we sit down and get to know each other collectively? Find out where you went to school, find out about your family, find out what you will be doing in your hobbies and your interests. And once I know somebody, then I'm able to, and praise God for Mount Union, it helped me be able to develop relationships with individuals and people that I may not know, just trying to find commonalities because we all have more in common than we do difference. Today is April the 15th. Traditionally, everybody in here would have had to make sure that their taxes were submitted by today. We got that in common. When we get up out here, everybody's going to be traveling, no matter what your vehicle looks like, from a Maybach to a Pinto, which means we got to get from point A to point B. So how do you find commonalities in order to engage people under a common goal? And that has been my style since I become an educational leader, is to try to find a way to develop connectivity in order to develop relationships so that we can move the ball forward.
Great, thank you. So what communication strategies would you use to communicate between the district and the family and community?
I think we have to look at the platforms that are working best. I was able to look and see some people are communicating through Facebook. I was able to look and see some people are using Zoom parent meetings. I was able to look at the communication page, and there are some leverages to some things I believe we can leverage there as a result of being in some different school systems and seeing how they're communicating. Currently, right now, what we found to be the most effective way to communicate with our parents is over communicating. We're using YouTube, we're using Facebook, we're using surveys, we're using questionnaires, we're using phone calls, we're doing community meetings, what we were before COVID. And so as a result of it, what I found to be the most effective though, and I don't know if we could do it here, but in the Kansas City schools, they have what's called a TV Channel 11. And on TV Channel 11, which is based on the CTE programs, every week, you can get updates from the superintendent. You can see your kids participating in the arts. You can see what is going on that week in regards to a calendar. They have shows like the Betty Mack Show. They have Coach's Corner. They have found a way to use that cable channel as a way to communicate effectively with the parents so that therefore they can see what's going on in real time. And as a result, it's been an effective means of communicating with parents because many parents log into that, they come into that cable channel, channel 11, because they know they're going to see their kids, they're going to see their schools. And as a result of it, they found that it's an effective way to communicate, especially if they know they're going to be showing a big game or a big drama performance and things of that nature. And they use that in order to get information out and then put things on there for feedback so that therefore they can do that. And that's one of the most effective ways I've seen of communicating your message, but to get the feedback, it's going to require a feedback loop. I may have to use hotlines. And as I said before, I got to meet with parents in the community where they're at and expect my principals to be able to do some of that too. Because as the superintendent, I can't do it all, but we can. I apologize, I keep looking back at you.
Yeah, I am sitting back here behind you. If selected as APS superintendent, what is your plan for APS college and career academies?
To enhance them, to ensure that they get to the fruition of the things that they said that they were capable of doing, to work with the community partners in order to make sure that more kids are getting CTE certifications. So if I am taking auto mechanics, did I come out of there with a certificate in auto mechanics? If I am taking cosmetology, did I come out with a certificate in cosmetology? If I'm taking a CCP class, did I actually complete that CCP class? If I have a business partnership, if we're able to do internships, we're able to do job shadowing, we're able to do this financial literacy in order to help our kids understand from those perspectives, to ensure that those teachers in those schools are ensuring that teaching and learning is taking place on a day-to-day basis, and actually to get to a point where people will be coming to us to find out, how did you do this? How did you work with your partners? How did you increase the levels of performance in order to be the best at what we do? To enhance it, to get more information. I think it's an exceptional concept. It's going to take everybody sitting at the table in order to talk through it, because in anything, just like a marriage, you have to adapt and adjust. You have to reflect, you got to revise, you got to take a step back, but make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of what role that they play. And right now, as I look at the college and career academies, I am not sure, based on interviews with the board and talking to some stakeholders, that we have a clear understanding. I think I talked about it in one of the slides here of what this actually looks like. For example, do we collectively bring these programs to realization? And how do we do that? How do we do that? But those would be my goals, but ultimately we would have to sit down collectively and figure out what role people believe that they play.
Very good. Following more than a year of disruption, isolation, and loss as a result of the worldwide pandemic, this collective trauma has led to an unprecedented need for mental health services that is expected to have serious health and social consequences for years to come. What role do you believe schools can and should play in screening for mental health needs and ensuring a full continuum of school-based mental health services? Prevention, intervention, treatment are readily accessible to students and staff.
What I've seen and what I've experienced is that in some of the school districts and systems that I work with, they're actually social workers and mental health service providers who have offices within those buildings on those campuses, so that therefore they can utilize their skills and resources in order to be successful. For example, in Columbus, nationwide children's behavioral health centers are located in my school at Livingston Elementary School, Mayor Franklin High School, East High School, Buckeye Middle School. Those organizations actually have offices within the building in order to communicate with parents. Now, as a result of COVID, things had to slow down as of March of last year, but those offices are there. When I worked in the Kansas City schools, I was a director of pupil services. So although we had school counselors, they didn't have license and background in trauma and grief and divorce and gender identity issues. And so what we started to do is to contract out in order to bring those services into the building in order to support the needs of those students and those families. And when I was at Hartford Middle School, we had very similar services. And what we found is sometimes during the school day, by having those agencies within the building, and we can work together collectively around the schedule, it's a very effective means of reaching those students. And so those are some of the ideas, because you're absolutely correct. Kids have been working in isolation. Families have been economically destitute, and some of them have been economically destroyed. And they're trying to come back, and that weighs on you heavily. So we try to get those offices within the building. They have satellite campuses and do things of that nature within those schools. And plus, Akron City schools are supposed to be working on being full service community learning centers, which means these offices are supposed to be open up to 7 o'clock. How do we cut through some of the red tape in order to allow these agencies to be able to facilitate their services within the school as a satellite office, in addition to being able to work with all of their own offices too? So those are some of the ideas, but I say first, Mr. Horton, I would like to utilize that panorama survey. We are using it tremendously right now in the Columbus City schools, and the feedback that we've gotten allows us to fine tune the services and the needs of those students and those families based on the results. It goes from the school level to the individual student level, so that therefore you can find specific, as we call it when we're doing the research and putting things together, categories of support needed based on using that panorama survey. And I'm certain the agencies have some surveys that they could use too.
Thank you. So what is your experience with collaboration between any of the districts where you've worked and the public library that serves that community.
So best example I can give is Hartford Middle School, where the library was right across the street. So I'm here in Hartford, and right across the street is the public library, and right across the street is Mrs. McCullough, CJ's grandma. And so our kids would go from the schools to the library after school, in many cases, almost like after school care. So I had to go to the library quite often. Mr. Womack, the kids over here on these computers at sites they're not supposed to be at. I'm just like, hey, man, you know you're not supposed to be on there. But we work with the library in order to do programming. We work with the library in order to provide resources. The library was also utilized in order to help us with adult programs when they would come into our school as well, because our school is a full service community school grant recipient. We have what was called a Milk S. Eisenhower full service community school grant. It was about additional $172,000, which allowed us to provide summer work programs for our kids, because somewhere along the way, as we talk with our partners, we do need to talk about it. We don't talk about economic empowerment and financial literacy. How do we get some money into the pockets of these kids through work experience? Mrs. Scruggs, may she rest in peace, but Jean Scruggs is responsible for the Summer Youth Employment Program, and it helped us tremendously. And so our students would work at the libraries through grant funding that we had that I could give to, I forget her name, it leaves me right now. But I asked her, if I'm able to give you $2,000 from this grant, would you agree to employ the students that you select to help with this library, these programs and things of that nature? So that's my direct experience in regards to working with libraries based on what we did at Hartford Middle School. It was a great relationship, and we would come in and do programming. They also hired our kids in the summer to help support them through the Milton S. Eisenhower money we had. I think they hired about 4 kids. Those 4 kids made about $500 a piece working in the library, but it helped me get school closed, and we were willing to work together collectively as partners.
Thank you, thank you. And I see that we've come to the end of our time together this morning. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Womack, for sharing everything that you've had to share with us this morning.
Okay.
Again, thank you to all of you. Gosh, this is the end of our daily meetings for this, but we so appreciate the fact that you have been with us and taking part in this process. Share your feedback and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Middle row out first, that's my